Great. So now that we've talked about the basics about bringing data into Domo, let's talk about what we do with it, because creating cards is usually the main reason why we be bringing data into Domo in the first place. So getting started, as I mentioned, there are lots of different avenues to create a card in Domo. And just a reminder, all graphs that you make in Domo fit under the card category. There are some other cards like text cards or image cards, but all graphs are cards, kind of like squares to rectangles. So let's talk about the avenues for creating a card, and then a big texty warning that is important enough that I put it here so that it would be easy for anyone who is just looking at the static version of this training rather than watching it later to be able to see it. So first of all, we'll start out with my favorite way to create a card, which is to go to the data set, click cards, and then click add card. I like to do this in part because it gives me a chance, especially if I'm working with a new data set, to spend some time just skimming the data table first so that I, can verify that how I'm expecting that data to be structured is actually correct. Then another option is if you're already on a dashboard, say you're adding a new card to a dashboard that's already been created, or you've just created a new dashboard because you have already watched this training and you know how to do that too. You can create a new card from a dashboard. You can also create a card from another card. This can be useful if you're building like a number of cards that use the same data and are going to be the same card type and they're going to look the same. You're just going to switch out some variables and some of the hover text. However, Domo has two really confusingly worded options here, and they have very, very different effects. So you have the option to move/copy, and then you have the option to save as. If you were to select move/copy, it will give you the option to say, not only do I want this card to be where it is already located on X dashboard, I also want it to be located on Y dashboard. But that is not going to actually create another independent copy of the card. Rather, it's going to create kind of like a visualized desktop shortcut to that original card. In Domo's mind, it's going to be the same object with the same object ID. So if you make any changes to the new card, those changes are also going to carry over to the old card because it's actually the same card. It's just visualized in different places. I probably, if I were on the UI team for Domo, I'd say maybe copy isn't the best word here. But I'm not. So instead, I'm just going to direct you here to always choose save as if that is your goal, is to save yourself some work by building off a card that you've already made or that has already been made by someone else, but to then make changes that you do not want to carry over to the original. One of the folks on our team has a mnemonic that they use that says, like, if you choose save as, that means you're safe. If that is memorable to you, please use it. Otherwise, you can refer back to this very dense text. But have seen people make changes that are very hard to walk back later. So just proceed with caution. Moving on, we're now going to talk about some of the components of a card so that when we're talking about, how to modify them later in the analyzer, it's easy to understand what we're talking about. Some of these are super simple, like this is obviously the card title. This is the card content. But some of these others are going to be specific to Domo. So Domo has an option to have a summary number. So when we talk about a summary number, do we want to show it or not? What is the variable that should be represented in the summary number? This is what we're talking about. It's going to appear right here. If you were to click this, these two icons here are usually only going to appear if you've hovered over the card with your mouse. But if that's the case, clicking this is going to go to the card details. So it will take you to a page where you're not looking just at this card on a dashboard, but the card has its own page. It's going to have different options for how you can engage with the card, which you may or may not want. So that's what it means if you click that. This wrench here is your card options. So that menu that was a very close-up screenshot in the last slide of move/copy versus save as. If you click this, it's going to be like down here. You can get to the analyzer interface here, though there are also other ways you can get to the analyzer interface. But if you want to do something to a card and you're not sure where to start, this is usually a pretty good bet. So now that we have a good sense of how to orient ourselves to Domo's version of a graph and its different parts, we will talk about how to actually edit them. So again, kind of like our menu walkthrough before, I know this is a little overwhelming. You are not supposed to be able to read any of the text or the variables here. But what I do want you to get a sense of is like a high level overview of what is where in Domo. So we'll start on the left hand first and kind of work our way vaguely rightward. So this is the data pane. This is where I can see what data set I'm connected to here. If I want to change what data set that is, I can click this and it will allow me to search for another data set, and I can plug this card into something else. This is also going to show what are the dimensions and measures that already exist in the data set. So a dimension would be something like a categorical variable, a date variable, something like device category or browser. No measures exist in this data set, so maybe that wasn't the best example for a screenshot, but here we are already. So anything that is numeric, something that you would then sum or average, that would live here. It would also be a green color. And then lastly, we will circle back to beast modes later, but if you have created any beast modes on this card, any custom calculations, or you or anyone else has created a beast mode on another card built on this data set and has checked the box that it should be shared with any other card that is built on this data set as a pre-made option, this is where you could see that. And if you hover above them, you'll be able to see who created that beast mode. And also you'll see a little preview of how it is actually calculated. So that can be very useful. If you want to edit a beast mode or create a new one, we will get to that later. Moving again, sort of to the right, this is the filter and sort pane. So if I wanted to filter out to only see a specific form, or I wanted to exclude a specific form, I would drag that variable here, I would release it, and then I'd be able to make those changes. I'd be able to pick from a drop-down menu, I'd be able to search for different options, I'd be able to choose whether I wanted to include or exclude, and that would affect everything on the card here. Oops. Next below that, chart properties. I want to flag that this is going to change, sometimes dramatically, based on what chart type you select. So here we have quite a bit of flexibility. Each of these is a different menu, but there is some overlap between different chart types. The general is going to kind of have the top line things that I might want to change about this graph type. This is a horizontal bar. And then I'm also going to have some different options to make some specifications for grid lines, for like what I want the hover text to say when someone hovers over a bar in this chart, what the specific colors should be depending on my variables. That's where I'm going to be able to edit everything related to the specifics of the appearance of the chart that I've selected. However, there are some chart types in Domo, and you kind of only figure it out by playing around with them, that have very few options for customization. So you might not even see this many, let alone be able to scroll for more. And there's unfortunately not a way to make them more customized. So there's some amount of experimentation that you'll just need to do to figure out what is the chart type that looks the way you want it to, and also is, able to be manipulated in a way that also meets your needs. So this kind of like anything you'd want to customize about appearance is going to be here in chart properties. Moving over here, this is the card data fields menu. So sort of similar to what we talked about with filters and sorting, anything that is actually the variable you want to be shown on this chart, you're going to drag from the data pane and drop here. You can use the actual measures and dimensions that came in the original data set. You can also treat your beast modes exactly the same. So you're going to drag these over here. Again, this is a bar chart, so there's X and Y axes. For some charts, I might use series. Any of the tooltip fields is any additional information that I'm going to want to appear in the hover text. So if there's something that I want to specify or additional info I want folks to be able to get from the hypertext, that is something that I would put here and then be able to call in the tooltip menu. And then over here in the date menu, this is where, this is going to look a little bit similar to the dashboard level date options that we looked at. As far as the options, you can choose previous, current, between two dates. You can change whether you're grouping by week, by month. Again, this was in our original example, like this isn't something that has a date grouping component, so changing the grouping is not going to change how this is visualized. But for something like a line chart or a multi-value gauge, that would look very different. I would say that in general, you are more likely to specify the grouping type for the date menu on a card and less likely to limit what the date range is, but that might not be true of your use case, and you can do both here. And then our second to last option over here before I circle back is the chart types menu. It's going to default and show you all the most quote unquote popular options first, but it also has a drop down menu here so you can see other alternative options of different types of horizontal bars, different types of vertical bars, and kind of play around and see what those presets are. And again, what is actually going to be a good fit with your needs. And then the final thing I want to show you is circling all the way back around clockwise, which is the data table option. This is something that is probably not going to be visible in the original view when you load it. You'll just see this little data table text at the bottom that is possibly covered up by the help button like it is here. And what you can do is if you click this bottom bar and pull it up, you'll be able to see the data as it's summarized on the card. So again, especially if you're working with, say, a multi-value gauge and you're trying to verify, why is this percent change not the way that I thought it would be? This can be a really helpful tool to pull up, look at the data table and kind of troubleshoot in a pre-aggregated but table form, like what is actually going on here? What is this number actually being compared to? So you can then go back to chart properties and change whatever you need to change. So we've talked about most of these already, but I do want to flag here that we do have more information in just like in this table here to kind of walk you through, a lot of that was really fast, what these different terms mean. If you get confused moving forward, just so you don't have to toggle all the way back to this part of the recording, it is all written down here. Next, we talked about chart types already, but I just wanted to give you kind of an overview of some of the ones that we most commonly used and things that we're building, and also what they are called in Domo's universe. So if that is something you are looking to do yourself, it is easy to find if you've seen it on other dashboards and are looking to use it for yourself. So these are all going to look a little bit squished just because I pulled them out of my overview. It's not like a large actually designed dashboards. It's kind of like you'll see when you look in your overview. It's more like a filing cabinet. So that's why they're like small little previews, but they should look familiar to things that you've seen in Domo already. So we have like a curved line chart. There are other types of line chart, so many other types of line chart. A vertical bar, a horizontal bar. In Domo's world, these are different types of charts, even though you might think of them as a similar one, just on a different orientation. A multi-value gauge is something that we use quite a bit. This is something if you want to group by week and show an automatic comparison to the previous period or even the starting period, this is a really great tool to do so. Though it's often also nice to pair it either with a drill path chart or with an additional chart on a dashboard to show like longer term trends in addition to just period over period comparisons. And then some other examples, a mega table, which is basically just a basic table with not necessarily a ton of formatting, but it is scrollable. So if you have you're not going to want to scroll in your PowerPoint unless you want to give a really quick flash preview of the next slide. But it is scrollable, which can be useful if you need to display a lot of data, a changing amount of data on a dashboard, without having to worry about that not being visible in the card layout on the dashboard. A field gauge could be a really nice intuitive card type for a percentage of something. That's something that we try and use to break things up a bit and call attention to a very key metric. A heat map table is not scrollable like a mega table, but it does give you some nice, slightly more formatted options, which can be nice if you know that everything is going to fit in your dashboard layout already. And then finally, a heat map, which, I'm sure most folks have seen in Google Analytics or other places already, but it's something that you can build here as well, and is a nice way to look at trends over time in a way that isn't super text heavy. And then lastly, as I mentioned, we're going to talk about creating new calculations in cards. We are circling back to beast mode. So again, a beast mode is kind of a silly name for just a new calculated field that can be for a grouping, a group of records, or just to create something that is very specific. It's really useful if you want to create a rate of things. And are finding that trying to do it with a filter is changing your denominator in ways you didn't intend to. A beast mode is a really great way to do so. So to create a new beast mode, you're going to go to that Add Calculated Field button at the very bottom of the data pane in the Analyzer Card Builder view, and you're going to click on that. And then we'll talk about some of the things that are going to come up here. So you're going to see what your palette of possible functions is. There's a couple that we use all the time. So like count distinct is great for really unique counts. Would really strongly recommend people use that rather than Domo's default count aggregation function when you add something to the card data pane. But this will give you kind of like an option of what your toolkit is to work with, as well as a description and some guidance and examples of what that would look like. You can also see a preview of your data set fields here, though those will pop up here as well. So you would then write your function. You'd want to give it a name as well. You'd want to then click the share calculation on data set, which, if you're the only one building, you can choose to do or not do, but it really does save you from the possible vortex of creating a bunch of different calculations again and again and again for the same data set and having to name them different things. So I would say as a default, this is much better to do. And then second to lastly, you're going to then click Validate Formula here. This little tiny blue circle will spin and you'll either get a green check mark or a yellow warning sign, which is a sign that you need to go back and fix something in your code because it's not quite working correctly. Sometimes it'll give you a tip for what's wrong, sometimes it won't. But once you do see that green check mark, you're then going to hit Save and Close, which is going to X you out of this menu, and you will then see the new beast mode that you named on the bottom left of the data pane. One other thing that I will flag is even if you save the beast mode, if you do not then save the card, if you just X out of the card and do not hit save changes, your beast mode will not be truly saved until you are out of the card and all the changes on the card are saved. So if that is something that has happened, you find yourself chasing the ghost of beast modes that you were sure you'd already created, that may be one of the reasons why.